Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are taking a necessary and I think really complex journey straight into the ethical minefield of our modern digital world.
hmm
Data, that intangible asset, it has so profoundly influenced decision making across every single sector.
Oh,
We're
absolutely.
talking about everything from what mortgage rate you qualify for to, diagnostic decisions in healthcare, even the surveillance systems operating in your city.
Right.
We are now living in an era that's defined by this just exponential expansion of data, and it feels like that rapid growth has completely outpaced our moral frameworks.
That's really the critical point. We talk a lot about big data, but it helps to look at the mechanics of why it's so big now. The sheer volume of available information has just exploded.
And why is that? What are the main drivers?
Well, there are two major factors. First, the relentless spread of the Internet of Things, or IoT. I
Mm,
mean, every connected device from your car to your smart toaster is now a sensor.
a data collection point.
Exactly. And second, there's been a massive decrease in the costs of computation and storage. It is just so cheap, easy, and continuous to collect data now.
So every one of those devices, your smartphone, your smartwatch, even simple web traces when you're browsing, it's all leaving this kind of digital exhaust that gets aggregated.
It is. And we're talking about vast, vast volumes of information from a multitude of sources.
And what makes this big data different is its sheer variety, the velocity, and I guess it's often questionable reliability. This isn't just neat, organized spreadsheet information anymore.
No, not at all. It's highly unstructured. It's often scraped from social media or, weblogs, and it varies wildly in format and reliability. And that's
Yeah.
precisely why this ethical conversation has become so incredibly urgent.
So we have to define our terms. What is the scope of data ethics here?
It's a great question because it is fundamentally distinct from just legal compliance.
Okay, so you mean just because you follow the letter of the law, say ticking the box on GDPR or HIPAA,
Mm.
that doesn't automatically mean you're acting ethically.
Exactly. Legal compliance is the floor. It's the bare minimum, not the ceiling. Data ethics addresses the fundamental moral responsibility that's inherent in the collection, the sharing, the analysis, and the use of this ocean of information.
It's about the spirit of the law, not just the technical rule.
Precisely. And this moral responsibility becomes paramount because data is generated by people, by you, which creates an immediate obligation for those who are collecting it.
I often hear data referred to as the new oil, which, it certainly implies its incredible economic value.
It does.
But unlike oil, which is extracted from the ground, data is constantly being generated by human activity, by us, which makes the stakes so much higher.
So much higher.
Yeah.
And the core goal of modern data ethics is not to stop data collection. That's not realistic. The goal is to minimize the adverse and often unintended effect that can arise during that collection, analysis, and storage.
So it's about making sure these incredibly powerful tools and practices actually contribute positively to society.
Yes, and that they don't exacerbate existing inequalities. We've really reached a point where the risks are absolutely no longer theoretical.
You mentioned the urgency. Do we have any metrics on just how widespread the improper use of big data has become in, say, the corporate sphere?
We do, and the numbers are alarming. If you go back to 2018, even conservative estimates were predicting that a full 50% of business ethics violations occurring globally were specifically through the improper use of big data analytics.
50%.
50%. And this includes everything from unauthorized data sharing to, actively implementing biased algorithms that disadvantage certain consumer groups.
Wow.
That statistic alone really underscores the immediate necessity of establishing robust ethical guidelines because these failures, they translate directly into real-world harm for individuals and for entire groups.
And this isn't a static target, is it? The nature of these ethical standards seems to be evolving constantly because the technology keeps introducing new capabilities.
Oh, absolutely. The evolution of standards is moving so rapidly from these generalized principles, like the ones that guided traditional academic research, to highly specific contextual ethical frameworks.
So tailored for specific industries.
Exactly. We're seeing a focus on ethics tailored precisely for contexts like, say, sophisticated healthcare research, or the digital data collection involving minors through educational tech platforms.
Or analyzing online content during elections.
A huge one. The unique political challenges there are immense. These frameworks have to be adaptable because technology is just moving faster than any legislative body can possibly regulate. The ethical conversation has to happen inside engineering teams first.
That sets the stage perfectly.
Okay.
So let's unpack this. If data is the foundation of the modern digital economy, we need some foundational rules. What are the non-negotiables, the foundational pillars that underpin truly ethical data handling?
Well, we could essentially distill them down into 4 interwoven categories. And these really form the backbone of a moral code. They are consent, privacy, transparency, and the very confusing but crucial concept of data ownership.
And they're all connected.
All 4 are based on trust, control, and access. If any one of them fails, the entire ethical structure just collapses.
Let's start with consent then. It used to feel so simple. You sign this form, you agree to this one purpose. But the big data era has made informed consent feel almost like an oxymoron.
It has. The challenge really lies in the sheer volume and the complexity of the data being collected now.
Right.
Traditional methods required explicit, narrow consent. You stated the specific single purpose of the data collection. Now, with the proliferation of IoT and mobile apps and sensors, that border is just completely blurred.
So when you agree to use a new service, you're not really informed about all the other things they might do with your data down the line.
That's the question. Are you truly informed about the subsequent, often complex secondary uses of that personal data? Uses that might not even be conceived of when you first sign up.
I feel like I click I agree dozens of times a week, and the terms of service are often thousands of words long. I am consenting to uses I can't possibly understand. Is that what constitutes the consent trap?
That is precisely the consent trap. The value of consent is dramatically diminished when it becomes just a condition of service, which often happens through these manipulative user agreements.
People feel forced to agree because they need the service.
Exactly. You feel compelled to sign because you need the service to function in modern society, not because you truly understand the full implications of, say, a data leak or how your data will be monetized in the future.
And this is compounded by something called bundled consent, right? What is that?
Yes. Bundled consent is when you have to agree to a huge range of disparate uses all at once.
Like future research or sharing with third parties.
Right. All just to get access to one basic feature or function. It presents you with this all-or-nothing choice. And that effectively strips away any real power of negotiation or control over your specific data streams.
So voluntary participation becomes the key to restoring some of that power.
It's absolutely critical. Voluntary participation means that you must be truly free to opt in or opt out of active data collection at any point, without pressure, without fear of retaliation or, degradation of the core service you're paying for or accessing.
But even when we know our rights, it's not always easy to use them.
Well, that's the thing. Even when consumers are generally aware of their rights, for instance, the right to deletion or the right to opt out of their data being sold, there remains this notable gap in their practical ability to exercise those rights effectively.
It's buried in settings menu.
Exactly. The standards need to be accessible, immediate, and understandable to the general public, not hidden behind multiple menu layers or pages of complex legal jargon.
Okay, moving beyond consent, let's discuss the second pillar, privacy. We all accept it as a fundamental human right, but in a world where everything is connected, how do we actually operationalize that in data science?
In the data context, privacy gives you 2 essential rights: the right to control your personal data, and the right to have a reasonable expectation that that data will be protected from public exposure and misuse.
So what does that mean in practice?
Well, it means ethical data collection has to involve getting meaningful consent, ensuring robust anonymity where it's necessary, and being transparent about the specific usage.
We hear a lot about data anonymization, removing personally identifiable information, PII, like names, addresses, that kind of thing. For our audience, is that level of protection still sufficient in the age of massive data linkage?
Unfortunately, the limits of anonymization are becoming starkly clear, and this is where the technical nuance really matters. While encrypting or removing PII is crucial, its effectiveness cannot always be guaranteed. The major sophisticated threat, especially with big data, is what we call group privacy concerns, which can often lead to re-identification.
How does that re-identification work if my name and address are already removed from the data?
It happens when different, seemingly anonymous datasets are merged and linked together. For instance, an anonymized dataset showing your movie rental history might seem safe on its own.
Sure.
However, if that data set is then merged with another data set showing your timestamp location data collected, perhaps from your mobile phone carrier, and maybe a third data set showing your public voting record,
You can start connecting the dots.
you can cross-reference those data points to generate an extremely detailed and potentially identifiable profile. Things like timestamps, gender, your age demographic, specific purchase clusters. These seemingly benign data points can act as unique identifiers.
And they allow individuals or small groups to be identified with a high probability.
A very high probability. And this is why we have to worry about group privacy, because if we can identify a small cluster of people based on these linked characteristics, we can then target them.
That technical capability fundamentally shifts the burden of protection then. It means ethical practice has to go way beyond the bare minimum of the law.
It absolutely has to. It must center on a moral code that's based on trust, transparency, control, and access. We have to consider that sensitive information like, real-time records of your movement, your health biomarkers, or your communications can potentially be used to discriminate against or severely damage certain groups of people if it's exposed or improperly used.
And this moral code is what protects the user when technology advances faster than the law can keep up.
Exactly.
That leads us directly into the third and fourth pillars, transparency and data ownership. Data ownership is probably the most confusing and contentious concept for the average user, who I think often feels pretty exploited.
It is, because it's all about building and maintaining trust. Companies must be absolutely transparent about their collection practices. They need to clearly outline how data is collected, how specifically it is used, both primary and secondary uses, and where it is stored and shared geographically.
Why is that level of transparency so critical?
Because it's essential for all stakeholders, including you, to understand and assess the findings and the value that's being derived from the data. Without it, there's no trust.
Do we have any good examples of companies actually achieving this, giving users meaningful visibility into the data they hold?
Well, the Google dashboard is often cited as a benchmark for this.
Okay.
It allows users to proactively sort through and view the personal data Google has collected from them. So that's your search history, your location timeline, your app activity. It grants you direct access and theoretically enables you to make better informed choices about your privacy settings.
So that model where data collectors are transparent about information sharing and usage is the necessary path forward.
It has to be.
But wait, let me challenge that for a moment. Isn't the Google dashboard fundamentally limited in some ways? I mean, it shows you what they have, but does it truly give you substantive control over how they use it for secondary processing? Like, say, for training a new AI model or selling aggregated trend data to a hedge fund?
That is a critical challenge. You've hit on it exactly. Transparency often stops short of genuine accountability. While the dashboard might let you manage the primary data, like your search history, it often obscures the derivatives and the secondary monetization streams.
And this is where that data ownership dilemma comes in. If I generate the data on a platform, shouldn't I own it and control what happens with it?
That's the crux of the modern digital economy. It is a very complicated legal and ethical area. Data ownership doesn't revolve solely around physical possession. It also includes control, access, and crucially, the right to use the data and its derived knowledge.
And the people who generate the data, social media users, for example, they don't automatically own it.
No, they don't. Instead, you typically license your data to the platform through those lengthy terms of service, effectively handing over control and all the commercial rights.
So the average user is generating immense value, but receiving zero direct benefit or control. That sounds like a system that is tilted heavily in favor of the corporation.
It absolutely is.
Mm-hmm.
Ownership really splits into two key areas here. First is the right to control the data. So that means the right to access, edit, manage, and delete it, which is what laws like GDPR try to enforce.
And the second area.
The second is the right to benefit from the data. That is, the right to profit from its use or its sale. Many users feel that the balance is massively tilted against them. They know their personal data is valuable. It's the central premise behind all these free internet services, but they receive no personal benefit, only a service whose true cost is their privacy.
And the mechanism used by corporations is that complex legal licensing model that very few people ever read.
That's right. These are often complex, perpetual, worldwide, non-exclusive licenses. And this legal framework ensures that the company, not the individual, retains all the economic power and the full right to monetize the derived knowledge and insights from those massive data sets.
Until users feel empowered to claim a portion of that control and benefit, the ethical imbalance just persists.
It does.
Okay, that foundational discussion sets us up perfectly to see what happens when these pillars fail and fail spectacularly. Here's where it gets really interesting. We need to look at how big data technology can amplify human errors and inherent bias, creating massive societal risks that affect millions.
This is such a critical transition because when you have a system that lacks transparency and is built on data over which users have no real control, that system becomes a mechanism for perpetuating injustice at scale.
Right.
Algorithms are incredibly powerful tools, but they are not objective. They are fundamentally reflections of the data they are trained on. And that data, well, it reflects society's historical biases, prejudices, and systemic inequalities.
So the idea that big data analytics, just because of the sheer volume of information, would naturally generate some kind of neutral, optimal result without human input, that's a dangerous fantasy.
It is a myth that we need to actively dispel. The reality is that the amplification effect is profound. Algorithms have the capacity to amplify the impact of any action, good or bad, a million times over in seconds.
And if the input data is flawed.
If the input data is flawed, if the historical data lacks representation or contains historical prejudice against specific demographics, the outputs will reflect and often deepen those same flaws, perpetuating existing disparities at a scale previously unimaginable. This is systemic discrimination built right into the code.
The case study that perfectly illustrates this failure in a high-stakes corporate environment has to be Amazon's attempt at an internal hiring algorithm a few years ago.
Yes, this remains the classic, the textbook example of algorithmic bias. Between 2016 and 2017, Amazon worked on developing an internal algorithm that was designed to scan resumes, streamline hiring, and rate applicants for technical roles. The failure was almost immediate.
It developed a strong and measurable bias against female candidates.
A very strong bias.
And crucially, this wasn't programmed bias. No one told it to be sexist. How did the machine teach itself to discriminate?
The mechanism was rooted entirely in the training data. The algorithm trained itself on 10 years of historical hiring data that was collected primarily from their technology division.
And the tech industry was, and still is, overwhelmingly male-dominated.
Exactly. So during that period, the model identified historical male success as a crucial feature for a successful hire. It essentially learned that being male was a prerequisite. It then sought to eliminate applications that contained features that were statistically correlated with being female.
What kinds of features did it target?
It began to penalize terms that it associated with women in the resumes, things like identifying the word women in a phrase like women's chess club captain, or even penalizing graduates of all women's colleges.
Wow.
It just replicated and automated historical discrimination purely based on observed statistical patterns without understanding any of the social context.
So what happened to the project?
Well, Amazon scrapped the project because of its evident bias, but it proved a crucial point. Computerized decision-making in these high-stakes areas like employment, lending, and health, it has to operate fairly, and great care must be taken to protect the interests of the disadvantaged from this kind of data-driven systemic unfairness.
We see similar and perhaps even more immediate risks in really sensitive areas like law enforcement and national security, particularly with facial recognition technology.
Absolutely. The application of facial recognition algorithms, which are used widely in law enforcement surveillance, border control access systems, has demonstrated severe performance disparities that are rooted in flawed training data.
What did the research find?
Well, research published around 2018 consistently showed that these algorithms perform significantly worse on dark-skinned females compared to other demographics.
How significant was that difference in error rates? And what does an error rate even mean in a real-world context like policing?
The disparity was staggering. Error rates for identifying dark-skinned females were reported to be up to 34% higher than for lighter-skinned males.
34%.
Yes. And in a real-world context, a 34% error rate means that a system used for identifying suspects or, unlocking critical infrastructure is wildly inaccurate and unreliable for an entire demographic.
That's terrifying.
It severely compromises fairness, it compromises due process, and it introduces severe risk in areas like policing and justice. If these flawed systems are used to determine access to critical opportunities like housing or justice, that technical bias is amplified dramatically into widespread social harm.
It's one thing when algorithms fail due to technical bias. It's a whole other thing when the people controlling the data demonstrate a willful disregard for privacy. Let's look at some of the high-profile violations that really shattered public trust.
These are the stories that make people question every single click. The most infamous, of course, is the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica scandal back in 2018. The fundamental breach there was one of trust and consent.
Right.
Cambridge Analytica obtained data from an estimated 87 million Facebook users without their explicit, meaningful consent.
And they exploited that data for political profiling and targeted psychological manipulation during major elections.
Exactly. It demonstrated the profound dangers of unauthorized data access and misuse when you combine it with psychological targeting methods. The fallout just left consumers feeling completely betrayed and deeply uneasy about the platforms they used every day.
Platforms that were harvesting data far beyond what anyone assumed was being collected.
And are beyond.
And it wasn't just data brokers abusing external access. There were issues with internal misuse, too, which is perhaps even more disturbing.
The example of Uber's God Mode tool, which was reportedly active until 2014, is chilling.
What was that?
Reports claim this tool gave specific employees access to complete user data. We're talking real-time ride tracking, historical trips, personal locations, and crucially, this access was allegedly used internally to track celebrities, politicians, competitors.
And even personal connections like ex-partners of employees.
Yes. A former employee's lawsuit described reckless behavior and a total disregard for user privacy. It's a vivid reminder that threats to data security and privacy can be both external, like hackers and data brokers, and internal, from misuse by trusted staff.
One of the most intense and ethically charged recent examples involves data that can literally become evidence in a courtroom, which raises incredibly murky legal questions. I'm talking about period tracking apps after the Roe v. Wade decision.
This is such an intensely sensitive area that really demonstrates how a previously benign commercial function, just tracking your health cycles, can become a severe privacy risk because of a legal shift.
How so?
Many period tracking apps traditionally have very broad terms of service that allow them to share highly intimate personal data with third parties for analytics or advertising.
But once federal abortion protection was overturned in the U.S., the stakes changed completely.
Completely. In states with outright abortion bans or severe restrictions, these apps immediately came under intense scrutiny because their data could potentially become a means for prosecution.
So the question becomes an existential one.
It does. Could authorities issue subpoenas or warrants to these app companies or their third-party partners to obtain user data? Things like location, cycle patterns, even a sudden deletion of the app. Could that be used as circumstantial evidence in a criminal investigation against users or providers?
It moved the discussion from abstract commercial ethics to immediate bodily autonomy and legal jeopardy.
And it defied every expectation of privacy users had when they first downloaded the app.
And even core platform services like Twitter, now X, got caught up in exploiting personal data for commercial purposes involving advertisers without proper consent.
That's right. In 2019, Twitter admitted that it had provided advertisers access to users' personal data, specifically phone numbers and email addresses that users had supplied for security purposes, like two-factor authentication.
And that data was repurposed.
It was repurposed and matched against advertiser lists for their custom audiences, targeting without securing proper explicit consent for that commercial use. It just reinforced the public's worst fears, that even the most core, sensitive personal information entrusted to major platforms is constantly at risk of being exploited for commercial gain.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, it really sounds like regulators are desperately trying to play catch-up to the speed of data collection and misuse. What's the global response been to these repeated failures?
The global regulatory landscape has fundamentally shifted. It's moved from focusing merely on data privacy to demanding data accountability.
What does accountability mean in this context?
It means governments now expect companies not just to protect data, but to document, demonstrate, and prove how and why they collected it, and what safeguards they have in place. Companies have to be extremely rigorous in their due diligence when they're sharing or acquiring data from third parties.
The global standard, the one that really forced multinational corporations to change their processes worldwide, has to be the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR.
That is the undisputed cornerstone. GDPR was introduced in 2016 as a direct and comprehensive response to these ethical and trust concerns, and it aims to restore individuals' control over their personal data.
And what makes it so influential is its extraterritorial reach. right?
That's the key. It applies not just to organizations within the EU, but to any organization worldwide that collects, processes, or monitors the behavior of EU data subjects.
So even a company based solely in the US or Asia has to comply with GDPR if it serves even a handful of EU customers.
Precisely. And that is the genius of its global reach. GDPR mandates strict data protection and privacy requirements, requiring explicit, granular consent for collecting and processing personal data. It enshrines user rights, transparency, fairness, accuracy, and confidentiality.
And the penalties have teeth.
Oh, they have serious teeth. The penalties are designed to be an existential threat to non-compliant corporations. Organizations can face fines as high as 20 million euros, or 4% of their global annual revenue, whichever is larger. That severity has forced organizational change and established a de facto global standard.
And while the U.S. lacks a comprehensive federal law, the state of California has really led the charge with the California Consumer Privacy Act, the CCPA.
It has. The CCPA grants California residents substantial rights, mirroring some of the key protections found in GDPR. These rights include the right to know what specific personal data is collected about you, the right to request the deletion of your data.
And crucially, the right to opt out of the sale of your data to third parties.
Yes, which is so important in the U.S. context. And while it's state level, its implementation has forced large national U.S. businesses to upgrade their systems and procedures toward greater accountability.
And because digital exposure starts so young now, there's also the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, COPPA.
COPPA, which is a U.S. federal law, imposes essential requirements on apps and websites that collect data from children under the age of 13. It specifically requires the necessity of verified parental consent before any data collection begins, and it mandates strong, robust data security measures.
It recognizes that children are a particularly vulnerable population.
Exactly. They lack the cognitive capacity and objective understanding required to make informed decisions about the long-term value and use of their data.
We've seen some concrete corporate shifts in response to this regulatory pressure, particularly from the major platforms that have faced the most public backlash, like Facebook after the Cambridge Analytica scandal.
Yes. One of the most significant symbolic moves was when Facebook notably distanced itself from third-party data brokers by shutting down its Partner Categories program.
Remind us what that was.
That program previously allowed major third-party data providers, companies like Experian, Axiom, and Oracle, to target ads directly on the platform based on profiles they had compiled from public records, consumer contests, and loyalty programs, all happening outside of Facebook.
When they did this, the company framed it as a move toward greater user privacy. But you have to wonder, was that a genuine ethical pivot, or was it just regulatory lip service to avoid those massive GDPR fines?
That is precisely the critical counter-argument that critics raised. While the reasoning was officially framed as improving privacy, critics questioned whether Facebook, which collects vast amounts of behavioral data itself, was just eliminating competition and centralizing its own data brokerage power.
So it might have just been a calculated business move.
It may well have been a calculated move aimed at meeting GDPR guidelines and maintaining user trust after the Cambridge Analytica disaster, rather than a fundamental shift in its collection philosophy.
What other shifts have they made to improve accountability that might be a bit more substantial?
Well, they shifted the burden of proof. Facebook also added a new tool that requires advertisers to verify that they gained explicit consent for any email addresses or customer lists they upload for custom audiences targeting.
So if an advertiser wants to target their existing customers on Facebook,
They have to prove they have permission. By adding that verification requirement, Facebook technically shifted the burden of ethical data sourcing directly onto the advertiser. It requires them to confirm that the third-party data was responsibly sourced and consented to. It forces accountability down the supply chain.
so across the board, there is this fundamental public desire for good data management that respects individual control.
Absolutely. Studies show a widespread dissatisfaction with the current status quo, where commercial organizations control the most intimate details of our personal data with very little transparency.
What do people want?
The public wants methods that offer them real control over their data, not just the illusion of it. They want regulatory oversight, and they want clear, immediate options to opt out of data gathering. Aligning with public expectations is crucial for maintaining trust and ethical integrity, especially when data is being used for these high-stakes societal functions.
Okay, let's zoom out now and look at where these ethical concerns take on different and often far more profound dimensions. So, what does this all mean when we apply it to specific high stakes contexts? We're talking about everything from life saving medical research to research required in active conflict zones.
The context is everything, and nowhere is data more sensitive than in healthcare. The potential benefits accelerating drug discovery, improving diagnostics, personalizing treatment are enormous. But so are the risks of misuse and discrimination.
Medical data is clearly a highly valuable commodity. What is the scale of that value? We hear numbers thrown around.
The market for medical data is immense. It's potentially worth billions of US dollars annually. This is particularly true for identified datasets, where information like genetic markers or treatment history can be linked to other datasets.
And that identified data commands a premium.
It does, because it allows for far more comprehensive and lucrative research into how individuals respond to treatments. Researchers routinely pay substantial access fees for third-party statistical databases and biobanks, which establishes the clear, inherent economic value in this field.
And unlike purely commercial data, medical data has this compelling dual use potential. It can benefit the individual while simultaneously benefiting society as a whole.
That is the core ethical justification for sharing it. The products and knowledge developed from personal medical information, a new vaccine, a predictive model for a disease, have the potential to benefit the health of entire populations at once.
But that utility doesn't diminish the need for stringent ethics.
Not at all. All stakeholders have to intensely consider vulnerable populations.
Who are the vulnerable populations in this specific context?
Well, we're talking about young people, those with specific chronic diseases, or individuals with stigmatized conditions like mental illness or certain infectious diseases. These are people who may have data of high interest to researchers, but are less equipped to make objective, long-term decisions about its value and its subsequent use. The exploitation of these vulnerable data pools is a major ethical flashpoint in medical research.
If the data is so valuable to corporations and researchers, should individuals be informed of that potential value before they agree to share it? Should there be a notion of informed value?
Consideration should absolutely be given to informing individuals of the potential monetary or knowledge value of their medical data before they consent to contribute it.
Right.
While an individual's raw blood pressure reading has little value per se, its value is immense when it's transformed into aggregate knowledge, which is then monetized through patents or drug development. Individuals need the right to understand and manage this value to exercise true freedom over their bodies and their information.
Next, let's look at education. AI and machine learning are rapidly integrating into educational systems, from personalized learning analytics to predictive systems that track student engagement and performance. What ethical dilemmas does this create for the learner?
The increased use of sophisticated educational data collection and analysis poses three major dilemmas for the student that go way beyond standard privacy concerns.
Okay, what's first?
The first is the fundamental and pervasive violation of privacy that occurs during the continuous collection, storage, and sharing of granular educational data, which is often captured during remote learning or through mandated school platforms.
And the second dilemma relates to the analytical promise of AI itself predicting student outcomes or career trajectories.
That's the second crucial point. The predictive function of educational data can actually deprive learners of the ability to make independent choices about their future path.
How so?
When data systems determine a student's predicted potential or assign them to a specific track, it can create a self-fulfilling prophecy. It can limit their aspirations and their self-determination based on past performance rather than their potential for future growth.
And the third dilemma you mentioned is particularly fascinating. The concept of a profound lack of forgetting ability.
Yes. The application of these educational data systems leads to a preference for evaluation by rigid data standards. This lack of a forgetting ability means that past mistakes, low scores, or behavioral issues are always on the permanent digital record.
And that can influence future opportunities for years to come.
For years, whether that's university admissions, loan eligibility, or even future employment background checks. This restricts the development of educational subjects who need the space to change, to grow, to mature, and sometimes to fail without permanent data consequences haunting their future.
Especially for minors.
For minors, schools have an extremely high burden to safeguard this student data, comply with laws like FERPA, and maintain absolute transparency to build trust with students and their families.
Finally, let's turn to research in humanitarian and conflict settings, where these ethical dilemmas can become matters of life and death, even for the research team itself. The need for data here is critical for evidence-based interventions, but the logistical and ethical challenges are just extreme.
Research in these instability zones, such as those conducted in conflict settings, like the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, or DRC, which is rich in resources but afflicted by systemic violence, is essential for aid and policy decisions. But the ethical frameworks designed for safe, controlled academic environments, they simply collapse under the weight of active conflict.
What specific and persistent risks do the local data collectors face in these environments? This was one of the most compelling details from the source material.
The risks are significant, persistent, and multifaceted. Local data collectors face severe physical danger, including direct exposure to armed groups and militia at roadblocks, road inaccessibility due to damaged infrastructure, and severe transportation hazards.
And it goes beyond physical danger.
They also reported instances of outright financial extortion at checkpoints and roadblocks that were set up by local authorities or armed factions, which adds massive cost and risk to the entire process.
And there are specific gender-related risks unique to these environments, too.
Absolutely. Female data collectors face compounded risks, including gender-related risks like sexual harassment and violence, simply by conducting interviews in isolated areas. This is compounded by grueling working conditions, adapting to poor infrastructure, unreliable network access for data uploads, and very basic accommodations.
So ensuring their safety has to be the #1 priority.
Ensuring the safety, security, and anonymity of these local teams must be the primary ethical concern before any data collection even begins.
Beyond the physical threats, what about the severe emotional toll, the secondary trauma of the data they are collecting?
Data collectors reported severe emotional distress and secondary trauma from exposure to harrowing participant testimonies. They were sitting across from people relaying first-hand accounts of extreme violence, including descriptions of rape, incest, sexual violence, and unimaginable poverty.
That's unimaginable.
Sometimes including details of suicidal ideation among the interviewees. Female data collectors particularly reflected on the intense difficulty of processing and compartmentalizing these distressing stories while trying to remain professional.
It seems like an almost impossible task to conduct ethical research under those conditions without a severe psychological cost.
It really highlights the essential, critical role and the immense bravery of these local teams. Despite the danger and the trauma, data collectors often expressed that the risks were justified and worth taking. They highlighted their belief in the necessity of the research for evidence-based humanitarian interventions.
But that can't be the end of the ethical obligation.
No. It just underscores that ethical adherence, safety, and cultural sensitivity rely heavily on robust risk mitigation strategies, comprehensive training, and crucially, structured psychological support systems for the research teams to prevent burnout and long-term trauma. The ethics here demand protecting the collectors just as much as the subjects.
That brings us to our conclusion. This entire deep dive illustrates a massive, constant tension between technological benefit, the promise of AI and big data, and our ethical responsibility toward the individuals generating that data.
It does. And the critical takeaway is that ethical considerations are not merely a bolt-on regulatory compliance check that you perform at the end of a project. They have to be integral to every single aspect of data science.
Considered from the very beginning.
Yes, considered in the initial design, in the engineering of the system, and in the eventual decision-making architecture. When data is used properly, it can mitigate problems like healthcare disparity. But when it's used improperly, particularly with biased input, it can perpetuate and deepen already harmful systemic disparities.
So what are the key recommendations coming out of this review for organizations trying to navigate this landscape responsibly and proactively?
The comprehensive review points to several key actionable recommendations for responsible use. These include enhanced ethical education in data science for all professionals, not just the legal team.
And what else?
The development of inclusive and adaptable ethical frameworks that change with the technology, strengthening regulatory oversight worldwide to ensure global consistency, and critically, promoting public engagement and literacy in data ethics discussions to maintain trust and transparency.
We mentioned earlier that ethics cannot just be a checklist item. It needs to be a continuous, actionable process, a method, not a moment.
Exactly. Ethics training has to go beyond merely securing informed consent, which, as we established, is often meaningless in the modern era. It must be treated as an actionable method that guides research and data practices from the initial design phase thinking about privacy by design principles, all the way through to the communication of results.
And that's essential for developing critical data literacy among professionals.
It is, and for ensuring that technological advancements consistently align with our societal values and equity goals.
As we wrap up, we always like to leave our listeners with a provocative thought to consider after the deep dive is done. What question does this entire landscape, the massive value, the lack of ownership, the potential for public good raise for the individual user?
Well, while your individual raw data, a single heartbeat measurement, one purchase record, may have little value per se, it has immense value when it's transformed into aggregate, monetized knowledge which is critical for public health, societal advancement, and corporate economic benefit.
Right.
So this raises an important question for all of us. In a world where big data research is critical for public gain, how can we truly empower individuals, especially the most vulnerable among us, to understand, manage, and perhaps even share in the value and destiny of their own raw data?
It's a huge question.
It requires profound shifts in control and transparency that we have yet to achieve.
A question worth considering. Every time you click, I agree. And every time you see a new device come online. Thank you for guiding us through this ethical minefield today.
My pleasure.